Hey everybody, Nate here from WASD20. Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about a question I get asked from time to time. It's often phrased as more of a complaint, really. The complaint would be, D&D is hard, and the question would be, why does D&D have to be so complicated? So let's talk about it. First off, I want to thank my good friend Recluse from the YouTube channel Recluse All Night for a lot of good conversations on this topic over the past few months, as he has really been struggling to get a grasp of the rules and wondering if this whole thing is even for him. And then I got a comment this morning that kind of pushed me over the edge into making this video, and this is on how to play D&D Part 1. Eggman IPEC says, D&D should be a lot of fun. These numbers hinder it a lot in my opinion. I think D&D should be about story and not about detailed mechanics. Well, Eggman, I want to say that that is a very valid viewpoint, one that a lot of people share, and I thank you for phrasing yours so succinctly. I get a lot of comments that are basically just people saying things like, how can anyone find this fun? Or, this is D&D? Yeah, not for me. And there may be many reasons for that, but I assume that one of the reasons might be a lot of the rules, the complex rules. And I want to make clear that in this video, I don't intend to defend D&D as not being complex. I recognize that it is complex. Those who are struggling for a reason. However, I do think it benefits from being complex in two ways that I'll be laying out in this video. But I'm not just going to leave it there. I also want to meet those skeptics and those who are struggling halfway and give you some of my thoughts and advice, including maybe don't play D&D. There are thousands of role-playing game systems out there, many of which are more rules-light than D&D and might be better suited to your tastes. So let's begin. Let's go back all the way to 1974 with the release of the Dungeons & Dragons Brown Box, the first commercially available version of the game. Going way back to the 1970s, we already find people complaining about its complexity. Now, D&D was catching on. There was clearly something here, but the rules as laid out in these books right here did not make it entirely clear what this game was or how it should be played. And a lot of players got confused. This led to Gary Gygax and TSR, his company, issuing lots and lots of rules clarifications over the following years. Future versions of Dungeons & Dragons remained pretty complex, although probably explained a little bit better, and the current 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons is known for being one of the less complex, more streamlined and rules-light versions of the games in recent history. So I want you to understand that this is not a new complaint. The game has always been pretty complex. New players of the Brown Box, if they had never been in contact with anyone who'd ever played the game, had a really hard time figuring out what the game was supposed to look like. Now, I'm open to the idea that there is some unnecessary complexity in some of these versions of the game. That's a fair point. But I will say that I think a lot of the complexity actually benefits the game. My first point is that complexity leads to more realistic gameplay. It leads to a closer simulation of reality. Now, I don't want a complete simulation of reality in my tabletop role-playing games. That would make it way too cumbersome, way too complex. I happen to think 5th edition D&D strikes a pretty good balance of simulating reality in some key ways, without being too complex. One example of how a game could be more complex is, for example, there are certain tabletop role-playing games or war games or combat games where you can call out a certain body part that you want to hit, and then you have a percentage to hit certain different body parts, and you have opposed rolls, so you roll for attack and roll to defend, and all these things that can slow the game down a bit and make it more complicated. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, you could have a very rules-light system. Let's just take a system where you're rolling a d20, and every time you get above a 10, you succeed. That would be pretty simple. I want to try something. What do you want to do? Roll a d20. I got a 12. You succeed. Whatever that was. Now, that you can probably start to see some problems with, and so we start to get more complexity. We recognize that certain characters are better at things than other characters. We start to get specialization and classes and different abilities. We also recognize that as you progress, you can level up. A game in which you don't level up is going to be a lot simpler. Because when you level up, you have to roll for hit points, you have to go and check your class and see if certain abilities that you get are going to apply now. And when you get those abilities, they add new exceptions to the rules and certain if this then that situations, and it's all getting more complex. Maybe if you're a spellcaster, you're adding a spell slot and then you're picking more spells, and the spells are adding new rules that you're not quite sure how they work, and you can see how it can get pretty complex in that way. But we are benefiting from that because we are recognizing that certain characters are going to be better at certain things, and characters can improve in certain things over time. That is simulating reality in some ways. The thing you need to remember when you see a really thick rule book is that characters in a tabletop role-playing game should be able to try anything they want. There should be very little restriction over what characters can do, just like in real life. That's what makes it different from a video game or a board game, where the rules are going to be pretty straightforward and you know the limits. In tabletop role-playing games, characters should be able to try anything. They should have a lot of freedom, just like in real life. And it's going to take a lot of rules to cover all the possible situations. Not all the possible situations, mind you, but some of them, to give a fairly accurate simulation of reality and to make for a good game experience. So that's the first point. Complexity leads to more realistic gameplay, however much that's desirable. My second point is that complexity can be fun. I know it might sound sick, but some people actually really enjoy crunching numbers, rolling all these dice and calculating what the damage will be, tweaking stats, trying to build an effective character or an extremely unique character. A lot of that stuff can be a lot of fun for some of us. And a lot of that fun would be lost if they moved to a more simplified rules system. So those are 2 points I wanted to make about why the game is complex. Complexity leads to more realistic gameplay, and for a lot of us, complexity can be a part of the fun. But now I want to meet those who are struggling with the complexity of the game halfway here, and give a few suggestions and some of my thoughts. First off, I'll say I think that new players might benefit from a more rules-light game system. Dungeons & Dragons is not the best system in general for completely new players. Some people are going to have no problem with it. Some people are going to pick it up, and that's great. But some people might actually find that a much more rules-light system benefits them. One of these systems could be Fate, for example. Or if you want to get even lighter, Fate Accelerated. Very rules-light system compared to a lot of these. You could try Basic Fantasy role-playing game. That's one that I've heard a lot of good things about. I've also heard a lot of good things recently about The Black Hack, which is just a really small PDF, super rules light. It costs like $2 on DriveThruRPG. I'll put a link down in the description below to that one. If you have any other suggestions for rules light systems that are simpler than D&D, put your suggestions down in the comments below too. I'd love to hear from you. Another piece of advice I'll give for some of you who are struggling is that if you are just taking this book and trying to read it and understand it in isolation, stop. Don't do that. Find a gaming group. Even if you don't know any other people who play the game, try to find a local gaming shop and show up and game with some strangers. And just try to pick it up. After a few game sessions, things really do start to click. For some people, after the first game session, it makes a whole lot more sense when you actually play the game. So just show up. You don't need to know the rules. That's the Dungeon Master's job. Just show up and learn by playing. Now, if you are in a group where you just have no access to anyone who has ever played the game and you are supposed to be the Dungeon Master, then the starter set is for you. Or, again, maybe you do try one of these more rules-light systems. The last thing I'll say is that it is possible to play Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition in a fairly rules-light way. Some people aren't going to enjoy that. Some people are really going to want to stick to the rules as written, but a lot of groups do just kind of run with it. You improvise, and if you don't know the rule, you don't go look it up. You just kind of make something up in the moment and go with it. And it can be a lot of fun. That totally depends on your play style and your group, but that's just something to think about. I've also been in sessions where there has been almost no rules used. We hardly rolled any dice because we were just role-playing and being immersed in the story for almost the entire session. And that can be a lot of fun for me once in a while. So those are some of my thoughts for players who might be struggling with the complexity of Dungeons & Dragons. Again, I want to recognize that I think the game is very complex. The rules are difficult to grasp at first. But I encourage you to jump in, start playing. You'll pick things up. And yeah, if you are a veteran player and you have advice for people who might be struggling with the rules, I encourage you to leave some of that down below too. I always love to hear from you. I'm sure a lot of people have good thoughts and good ideas on this topic. Lastly, I just want to thank everybody so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, would you consider giving it a thumbs up? If you're not subscribed, consider subscribing. And if you're interested in supporting WASD 20, I encourage you to check out my Patreon below. I want to thank the patrons for their monthly support of the channel and helping me do what I do here. That's all for this one, everybody. Take care. You'll see me again very soon.